Undergraduate physics and engineering programs. We may also be able to consider the state plan for Perkins 4 if the State Board of Education amends it at their March meeting. Chapter 12 of the rules is being merged with Chapter 7, and Chapter 7 is being reorganized. The rewrite will be posted in the Texas Register next week, and the public comment period will end in time for us to consider the new version at that meeting on April the 23rd. There's no intent to make major or substantive changes. We're only trying to make the rules easier to read and understand and follow, and to add details on recognition of accrediting agencies. However, because the rewrite is massive, we can expect comments, some of which may be directed at existing rules. Another item on the agenda for April will be the award of some $16 million of awards under the Norman Hackerman Advanced Research Program. The staff and their panels of subject matter experts are currently reviewing 520 proposals with the expectations of awarding between 100 and 120 grants for advanced research. The final item will be to hear the Commissioner's recommendation relating to the request from the Institute for Creation Research in Dallas. The staff expects to review a revised request later this month. One other significant event since our last meeting is that the Lumina Foundation has responded to our letter of interest in their new program, Making Opportunity Affordable, with a scheduled site visit on March the 25th. The Foundation expects to select up to 10 states to re-examine policies and practices in academic, fiscal, and regulatory areas, and to create a 5-year strategic plan to improve the productivity of higher education in the states. The selected states will receive grants of up to $2 million to begin implementation of the strategic plan. The next item on our agenda, item 2, will be a public hearing. So let me open the public hearing on the Tech Prep funding formula for program year 2008-2009. Bill Dixon, Director of Grants Administration, will describe the proposed formula. Hi, Bill.
The Coordinating Board has administered the Tech Prep program since its inception in 1990. The first grants were funded in 1992. The funds allocated to Texas flow to the Coordinating Board, and they may be granted to Tech Prep consortia or used by the Coordinating Board for state administration. Of the total that's allocated to Texas, 5% can be used for state administration, and the remaining 95% is distributed to 26 Tech Prep consortia. Of that 95%, the first 65% is divided equally amongst the 26 consortia, and that's the base funding. The remaining 35% is distributed proportionally based on the total student enrollment, and that's the funding formula that we're here for the public hearing about. It's a continuation of the existing formula, and this formula has been reviewed by the Tech Prep Consortia directors in their meeting here February the 8th.
Okay. Thanks, Phil. We invite any members of the public who would like to comment on the Tech Prep funding formula to come forward now. Okay. Thank you. The public hearing is concluded. Thank you, Phil. Agenda item 3 is an update on the Higher Education Policy Institute. Dr. David Gardner, Deputy Commissioner for Academic Planning and Policy, will present the update. David?
Thank you. I anticipate this will be very brief. As you know, that we received dollars from the Houston Endowment to create Higher Education Policy Institute. We've recently gone through some changes, and I'm taking a leadership in that institute at this point. I've been working with it, I guess, about a week and a half, 2 weeks now. So I just wanted to remind you that there are 3 areas in which the Institute will focus its efforts. The first is developmental education. We've had some discussion already today about our shortfalls in terms of developmental education, specifically how can we improve developmental education, really make it successful in the state. The second area is how do we really increase representation of Hispanic students in higher education and their success, addressing a number of issues within that, including whether it's really a matter of being Hispanic or is it as much being socioeconomic. What are really the factors involved in that, and how can we bring that to bear to have more success in the state. The third, we talked about measuring excellence in higher education, and that's in some ways been further defined by the discussion about incentive funding and how do we actually make sure that we're maintaining quality, in fact improving quality specifically. How do we better look at learning outcomes so that each of these is obviously areas that are central to what we're doing at the coordinating board, and in fact the reality is if we make some progress on each of these, it will be of great interest to the rest of the country, because these are to varying degrees the same issues everyone has, but we really see them in a greater magnitude in Texas at this time. People have been addressing learning outcomes for a number of years, and that sort of success is scattered around, and you can see different approaches, even in Texas, in terms of some institutions looking at measures that cut across disciplines, such as the collegiate learning assessment, and others looking specifically at individual courses. How do those things come to bear? So the basic strategy is to identify national experts in these areas, not to just rely on Texas, but where appropriate in Texas, bring in key folks. In some cases, identify that the research that's already been done. What do we really know? We don't really want to repeat any research that's not necessary. We want to learn from what's been done. How do we, and publish appropriate reports that come from that. We had talked about a speaker series. These two the identifying experts and speaker series really cross fertilizes each other, and that really what we're wanting to do is to bring the best knowledge to bear. We want them to work with staff. We want them to work with individuals across the state. And, of course, we'll have some what you might consider real research, beyond literature reviews, as we identify certain areas where we want to bring in, conduct field research to see what works and what doesn't work. In some cases, it might be where we have pilot projects that are funded. There's a potential, say, for some things we do with developmental ed with our state dollars to bring in researchers who would actually bring their focus to these things on two ends. One, to inform them and help them be better organized, but at the same time to really study them and determine what's working and isn't working. One thing that has come up from time to time is what's the relationship of the Institute to Ed Research Centers, and just want to emphasize once again that the intent is not to duplicate efforts, but to have them complementary wherever possible. The centers have already their own identified research projects, but I do think there's the potential for them to, and what we want to make sure is that we realize that potential is for the Houston Endowment money be used in such a way that it really helps add to those other efforts. There had been a process began to identify staff to fill at least a couple of positions. I'm looking at what I've been given, what those who have applied, and have begun to look at them, and hopefully we'll have some things in order. I was telling the commissioner earlier that I hope that we can have some at least people identified and projects within a couple of weeks to share with him. Frankly, we're a little bit behind, but we've got to accelerate now, and I anticipate that this is going to really help our overall efforts a great deal. That there will be, in the concept of think tank, I do want to emphasize that they will, there'll be the opportunity for them to identify some things somewhat independently, in a sense, so that they're not just guided by the daily realities of our work life here, so they can really concentrate on some things where our other staff are needing to respond to the legislature on a daily basis. The fellows and the staff hired for the Institute will be really focusing on their projects, and the intent is for them not to be drawn off for other issues.
Members, do you have questions? Brenda?
I have a couple of questions. This institute is funded. Is there a certain lifespan associated with the funding?
It's 4 years.
4?
4 years.
4 years.
In fact, the commissioner asked for fewer years, and they added years because they thought it was such a good proposal.
Okay, and there are certain expectations associated with the funding.
Yes.
And so I'm assuming that you will report to the board goals, timelines, and how the expectations tie into goals.
Yes, the
and timelines
commissioner actually
on a routine basis.
provided a business plan to the board in July,
Okay.
and so we can give you a copy. In fact,
I
I can
wasn't
give
here
you
in
this
July,
copy.
so I'd like to have one. Okay.
Okay, I'll hand it over to you in just a few minutes.
Okay, but it'll continue to be reported to us on a routine basis of some sort.
Yes, we've been asked to report at every one of these committee meetings.
Okay. And then my last question is, in terms of the learning outcomes, what do you anticipate will be the role of the private sector in that particular area?
Whatever would be appropriate, frankly. If you look.
What do you think is appropriate?
Well, typically, if you're going to look at measurement and issues, typically that is addressed by the private sector. They're the ones who, if you're going to use tests, they develop the test in conjunction with whatever sector they're working with, and of course you have institutions that have that kind of expertise, but you have just a multitude of testing companies that are involved in that process. You do have at the Council for Aid to Education, this CLA was developed by them, but they did work with private industry to help develop that, so it was a joint cooperation. But we don't really know where we're going. The real issue is, one of the issues is, unlike public education, the range of possibilities for people to study in higher education is much broader. So you go beyond having math, science. How do you determine if not only is an engineer learning what they should, but what about a civil engineer, an industrial engineer, an electrical engineer? Do you want to get down into that? The CLA takes an approach that it cuts across the curriculum and really looks at critical thinking skills, but there's some limitations to that as well. So one of the problems is there's just, how do you select what to measure? How do you make sure that what you are selecting to measure doesn't drive the entire curriculum and mean that you're primarily producing electrical engineers who write very well, but they're not really very good electrical engineers, or novelists who are good mathematicians, but they're bad novelists. So it's a challenging prospect. The commissioner might want to add into this, but the reality is higher education has not agreed on an approach yet, although in looking at this in more detail just the last month, even before getting more closely involved in the Institute, there's a lot of work that's been done, and many institutions are doing more in terms of learning outcomes than generally is realized, and we've found that in Texas, but there hasn't been an agreed upon approach to do that. In some states that have done it in more detail, such as Tennessee, where they actually connect it to funding, they have some general education assessments that are in common, but at the beyond that, there's a lot of institutional differentiation in terms of how they approach it, and everyone has come to some agreement that it's all right, but you can't say that the University of Tennessee is approaching it the same way as Memphis, as Middle Tennessee State. If I could tell you exactly how to do this, we wouldn't need to do this. So that's why we're bringing in experts. But I may have avoided your question. Are you saying, are we going to bring in?
Well,
let me
for example, the national experts. Who are they, and what are their backgrounds? I mean, again, that kind of ties into the public sector question, but.
Well, okay. Well, in that regard, I mean, for example, working with the CLA, there's a Richard Shavelson who's at Stanford, who's worked with that, and I don't know if he has any connection with a testing company. Frequently, people like that professor do. You of course have the College Board is involved in this in a big way in measurement. ACT, we've worked with National Evaluation Systems in Boston in terms of our developmental ed for 20 years. So one problem in working directly with the testing companies, in my view, and we haven't discussed this, is they have a product to sell. And so I think you've got to be, and their products frequently are the best. The real issue, I think, is how do you want to get at the outcomes, and then how do you do it? And I think then you can work with more closely with the private industry in terms of getting a product developed, because they're quite willing if they can. National Evaluation Systems love Texas because they developed a test for Texas, but based upon 1,000 faculty identifying what really needed, what skills you needed to succeed in math courses and education courses. I don't think I've answered your question yet. I've talked a lot.
Commissioner.
We are, well, we're going to get the private sector involved in several ways. For example, if you measure learning outcomes in professional disciplines like engineering and accounting and pharmacy, it's very clear how the private sector could be involved, because you're training people specifically for a job. So one of the things that you would do is you would talk to the employers about how well trained their recently hired graduates are. So that's one obvious way. That's more difficult to do in fields like mine, where you're not trained for anything in particular, and so it's hard to connect the private sector to evaluate learning outcomes in philosophy and political science and so forth. We also are taking a look at a whole range of companies, both nonprofit and for-profit, that are getting into the quality of learning area. David mentioned the College Board. We're talking to the College Board. I'm a trustee of the College Board, so I have a pretty good idea of what's going on there. We're talking to the CLA people regularly, and one of the first things that we're going to do as we launch our investigation of the field is we're going to do a review of the literature that exists right now, and we'll get we'll do a survey of what important projects are underway to measure learning outcomes now. I know, for example, that Harvard recently launched an assessment of learning outcomes at that campus. So we'll do that, but we'll involve the private sector. I think you were talking about employers, were you not? And obviously the employers will have the most explicit role in measuring learning outcomes in professional fields.
Let me clarify something, though, and you may disagree with me, Commissioner, but there are two discussions here. One is, we're having to deal with the incentive system and outcomes associated with that, but we're also talking about an agenda within, the institute, which you don't want to tell them the outcome. And you can easily tell them, here's how we're going to measure learning outcomes because we want to take this test or that test or the other. Well, part of what we need to bring to bear is some of the questions that people have had a hard time coming to terms with. And so that's why I was having a hard time and I didn't understand you were talking about the employers doing that. And we actually have a number of things in place for that already that we could use. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Want me to go?
Sure. I know you talked about looking at staffing needs and what have you. Are you acting in an interim role, or are you going to be the leader of the think tank?
I understand I am going to be the leader of the think tank, and we're going to hire the other staff. So I'm really adjusting to this. I mean, this is really something I hadn't been working with directly, and so this is what I've been doing after the rest of my family goes to bed at night for the last week or two, trying to get my hands on some of what's out there and how to get this rolling along faster than it has been, to be frank, and trying to deal with all three areas simultaneously.
Kind of like having a baby when you didn't know you were pregnant.
That's true. But there's a nice overlap.
How do you know that's true?
I've never been in this situation, yeah.
That's what my wife said the other night, so I guess you're right. She described it in a similar fashion.
Really?
Dang, Lynn.
Where that came from.
But there's a nice, I think there's an opportunity because there are things that we're doing. Here, they need to support the real daily action type agenda of the board and the things you're trying to get to happen. And our staff should be busy doing the things you need to be done, want to be done now, and they don't have as much time as some of these folks will to reflect, and they don't have necessarily in fact, I will say they don't have the expertise, because the people we're talking about will be among the most knowledgeable in the country in terms of these topics. There may be some areas, I was mentioning to the commissioners, like developmental ed, that we might want to identify someone who doesn't work directly in developmental ed but knows a lot about learning. So they take a different view, because in some ways developmental ed's become an industry. So we can talk to people that are knowledgeable about that, but it would be useful to get someone with a different view to see how they would approach it without the same type of investment in it as it currently exists.
David, do we still plan to take the outcomes of these studies to develop policy that we can recommend to the state?
Yes. Hopefully that will go. Now, I have to say, as with oil, occasionally there will be a dry hole, but we have to do that. But figuring out some things that definitely won't work is helpful. So we don't want to spend some money on things more that just aren't reaping any benefits for students.
Yes.
One of the exciting things about this project, and it was just awesome that, Commissioner, you made this happen in partnership with the Houston Endowment, was, if I remember correctly, the way you were describing it in the very beginning was they were going to be kind of walled off, and they were going to be out-of-the-box thinkers, really looking at innovation and like you're saying, David, that down the road stuff that we could eventually move into policy and take action on. I guess my concern with a current member of our staff leading this effort is obviously, you are also responsible for making sure that what we need to get done gets done, like you said. How can we, make sure that, Commissioner, we don't lose that initial vision you had of these folks being, you know what I'm saying, out there and totally thinking of innovative and fresh approaches, well, under the guardianship, perhaps, of
Can I address that before?
And I hope this is not taken in the wrong way.
No, actually, I like the question.
That's a good question.
Very much, because one of my concerns was, maybe I won't say, it's very important to have some of that thinking in place. You won't know this, but I value that very much. And at one time, I was sort of that person here who had sort of the wild ideas. I don't really have the time to do that anymore. We need people that are able to do that. And it may not be the best way to do it, but at the same time, you want at least to make sure you're doing things that we know we don't know about. I can tell you, I know to a great extent what we don't know, but at the same time, you want it to be at least connected enough
totally
that you really reap the benefit out of it.
Let me respond to your question. The reason I decided to proceed the way I did was I didn't want to lose any time conducting a national search for a director. We needed to start making progress right away. So what we're going to do is we're going to ensure the autonomy of the people that work in the policy center at one level down. David will still appoint an associate director, and that person will have the day-to-day responsibilities for overseeing the projects and so forth. And they will be essentially walled off from other activity the agency so that they can have that degree of autonomy. That not only it's not only something that I saw as a goal. It's specified in the provision of the grant.
That's what I
The
thought.
Houston Endowment said that this has to be an independent operation. So what's going to occur at the level of associate director? What we're going to do right now is we are going to identify some faculty associates or some research scholars. We haven't decided what we'll call them, so that they can start working on these projects right now. And then when we appoint an associate director, that person will have responsibility for day-to-day oversight.
Got it.
We'll bring some people in, and we will have people in residence for a while, and we will have other people that will be working at other sites around the country, and we'll bring them in occasionally to catch up on the research and so forth. But we still are committed to the idea of autonomy.
In fact, I mean, I think Raymond could tell you, I've talked about it as much as anyone. I've expressed concerns that not happen, because we've added staff that can do research, and with the idea in the past of being able to do some things like this, and they've always been
Swept up.
swept up into other things, and we desperately need this, and
Absolutely.
and frankly, it was one of on my wish list even before Raymond came, and he came up with the idea really, so I was very ecstatic that it was going to happen, because
It does sound like this associate director would be, more,
Hands-on,
making it
day-to-day
big-
guy.
Yeah, and it's under your guardianship, so to speak.
yeah, they
I
would,
see.
yeah,
Okay.
and it's not as though we wouldn't talk, but I would be making sure that they weren't swept into other things, and
Yeah, absolutely.
and make sure that things they needed within the agency happened, and that in fact what they did do was disseminate it in a way that people knew about it, and that people got it where they need, not just in the agency but across Texas and the rest of the country, hopefully.
Thank you.
Any more questions? David, I just have one quick question. You mentioned somewhere in there that everybody sort of agrees this is okay. Is there widespread acceptance of measuring excellence in the higher education community across the country?
No,
None.
no.
Well, I
there's
didn't think
not.
there was. But,
No, but there's a great deal of talk about it. I mean,
Yeah.
there's, it's a central issue in the incentive funding process, and that some people are afraid you'll encourage graduates with, less and less preparation. But there is a lot going on. It was really my point. There are a lot of people doing things, but I'd say there's several camps, but I don't think there's any agreement.
And it's all it's mostly very preliminary. We're in the very early stages of understanding the most efficient and effective ways to measure learning outcomes.
What would be an example of, I know like in a lot of the colleges, there's some sort of an exit exam into the workplace, but most of them, like, I don't know, like architecture, you have to intern for 3 years and then you take an exam. Is there any example in a college that you would use that maybe as a prototype?
Well,
In a college, I don't mean a university setting, but like a college of engineering, or, because like in law, you take the bar exam. That's a measurement.
there are actually a lot of examples when you talk about specific professional fields, but even in engineering, in engineering, you have what's this, licensed professional what's the right
The
phrase? The
professional
professional engineer,
PE,
but
yeah.
most engineers don't become PEs. The vast majority don't. But if
In
you,
an accounting CPA.
yeah. And so it's more likely that someone in accounting will become a CPA than someone in engineering will become a PE, I think. So you have those fields, but then you have broad areas, people who study art history or literature or sociology, you don't have similar examples. Psychology you do if you pursue being a licensed psychologist, but that's at the graduate level. I don't believe, have any programs or any states that allow bachelor's recipients alone to be licensed as psychologists. So you have broad areas where you don't have, that type of direct example. You'll find actually in our accountability system that where we have those types of examples, we actually include that in licensure pass rates for our institutions.
Right, and that's the perfect way to put into an accountability system some incentive funding for reaching, certain excellence, certain stages along that continuum of excellence, so that you get incentive funding for that. What is the teacher's exam called now? The exit?
Texas.
What's it called now?
Texas.
The what?
Exit.
Texas.
Yeah. So is that given like right when you graduate? So that would be a bachelor's degree, and then you take that exam in order to...
You really need to do it before, because you can't go to work for the public schools without having your certificate in your content field.
So that's an example of an undergraduate.
Yes, and that, in fact, is another one that's in the accountability system.
See, the problem with that approach is you can measure whether somebody crossed the threshold of competence or minimal qualifications, but you can't tell how much of that was due to what the university did.
Well, that's true.
It may well be that you had some super bright student who was there when they were admitted to Blue Bonnet University. That's what the challenge is. I happen to think that the ultimate solution, I've talked to my friends at the College Board about this, that the ultimate solution would be if some way you could align the SAT and their later exams for professional or graduate school, the GRE, the MCAT, the LSAT, and so forth. And there would be enough common data elements so that you could measure value added or quality growth or whatever. There are a lot of different terms that people use, and that you wouldn't require all graduates to take those tests, but you would have enough of a sample size to generalize about the learning outcomes at a given institution. And I know that some companies, private companies, are taking a look at precisely doing that.
One other issue or one approach people bring up is value added, and I think the Commissioner's talking about that to some extent, is that how much has a student really improved their knowledge and skills while enrolled. The UT system, and I may not be precise on what they found, so don't quote this part, but the essence is right, is that they found with one institution that using the CLA that they found a lot of growth with the students at a school that I believe it was UT Pan American. Much growth. They had made a lot of difference with their students. They found very little at UT Austin. And one of the reasons for that is that the initial testing was much higher. And so one issue you're always going to have with tests is what's the ceiling effect? I mean, is it really, can it follow them far enough to show the real value added? Is it standard at some level too low? And so I haven't had a chance to talk with them recently to see what they found about that, and this has been about a year. But so there are a whole range of issues, but based on that one exam, it appeared that one institution made a great deal of difference with their students, even though they came in at where they finished may have been where you had hoped they had begun in Austin.
Well, I certainly think it's a timely study, because given how much college education costs, the people need to know they're getting a lot for what they're paying for. Thanks, David.
That's so brief.
Agenda item 4 takes up items for the April 2008 board agenda related to our committee. Item 4A is the consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendations to the committee relating to requests for new degree programs. The first request, item 4A1, is from the University of Houston, which requests authority to offer a Bachelor of Science degree with a major in pharmacy science. Joe is going to explain this request and give us a recommendation. Joe?
And if I may, I think I should remind you, I approve a lot of bachelor's and master's level new programs on your behalf administratively after the staff has done the analysis and we've consulted with David and the Commissioner. There are some, though, that by the rules we must bring to you, and occasionally we'll bring some to you just because we're not so certain of them. This is one that by the rules exceeds $2 million threshold of cost, so we bring it to you. As you know, the entry-level degree for a practicing pharmacist is the Doctor of Pharmacy now. This is not, therefore, a professional degree for a practicing pharmacist. It is, however, to support the pharmaceutical industry. And there are programs like this in other states. There are none in Texas. This would build on the School of Pharmacy at the University of Houston, where the PharmD is the biggest part of that program, but this would allow some undergraduate students to complete a bachelor's degree and work for the pharmaceutical industry. The labs, much of the professional expertise is well in place. It will require some additional staffing and some reassigning of classrooms to make it work, but it's a very logical extension of what they're already doing, and we're recommending its approval. Certainly can try to go into more detail, although I'm noticing that Chris Fowler, who's done the hard work on this, is not here, so I may have to get back to you if your questions are too tough.
Any questions, members? Laurie?
So if a student could get a bachelor's, and then would there be a smooth transition if then that student did decide to go get the PharmD?
I would think it'd be actually a much smoother transition. Yes, but it's not just a feeder program. Mm-hmm. The focus is still primarily
like drug reps and pharmaceutical reps and
exactly. This may also be a good pre-med kind of program as well.
Any other questions? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign. Motion carries. The next item, 4A2, is a request from the University of Texas at Tyler for a Doctor of Philosophy degree with a major in Human Resource Development. Joe, will you tell us about this?
I will, and let me also tell you that Dr. Angela Helmer, our staff person who worked on this, is here, and Dr. Jim Tartar and Dr. Clayton Allen from UT Tyler are here. This is a particularly interesting proposal, and I have to say I think we gave UT Tyler a pretty hard time on it to get it to this stage, and they've done an outstanding job. Human resource development has, in most places, been a part of a college of education and is an outgrowth of adult education programs. Related kinds of work has occurred in business schools, but usually under the label of the PhD in management. What UT Tyler is proposing is to combine those two threads along with perhaps some other areas of research expertise to put together a program in human resource development at the doctoral level. We question them as to whether it should be a PhD or should be a professional doctorate. And recall we've had that discussion here in this committee. We brought in a team of outstanding consultants from Columbia University, George Washington University, and the University of Tennessee at Knoxville to review their proposal to visit on the site. They came back with a very strong recommendation for this program. They noted that this was a very solid research-oriented program, that it should definitely be a PhD and not a professional doctorate. They noted that two of the international leaders in the discipline have been hired by UT Tyler. They also observed that what UT Tyler is calling their business academy, which is large corporations supporting research in human resource development, will add a dimension of strength to this program that will put it right out in the forefront. So all the way around, an outstanding recommendation from the consultants, and an opportunity, I think, for UT Tyler to draw on expertise from across the university to build an exceptional, pretty much university-wide kind of program. Now, Dr. Tartar may be telling me that I'm stretching that too far on it. You can certainly quiz him on it, but we're pleased to recommend this one for approval.
Questions?
Joe, I'm sorry I don't know this, but is this following up with 5 annual reports and so forth a standard procedure, or?
I'm sorry. The 5-year report. Yes. Dr. Phillips is asking about in the heading there that they would do a 5-year report. We're requiring that of all new doctoral programs, that for the first 5 years they report on their actual enrollments, their actual recruiting of faculty, and the other thing, commitments that are made as a part of the 5-year plan that we've just reviewed and are recommending approval of. So this is a routine kind of thing.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Commissioner?
Yes, I wanted to underscore a point that Joe just made. We've been talking to to people at UT Tyler for at least 3 years on this issue, 4 years, and there's been a lot of very careful examination of this program, and our involvement in this program reflects our strong commitment to raising standards for doctoral education in Texas, and to making certain that the programs that we do approve are of a very high quality. My view is that doctoral education, particularly in PhD fields, has to be competitive at the national level. Secondly, we've been asking institutions that propose new doctoral programs to provide compelling evidence that there's a market for these proposed programs, and then we're asking departments and institutions to examine the rigor and the quality of the program once it's in place. Some people on the campuses have misinterpreted our position and have called it and have worried that we're calling a moratorium on doctoral programs. I've heard rumors that my position is that we should freeze for the foreseeable future the number of doctoral programs we have in the state, and none of that is true. We simply want to make sure that, given the limit on resources we have in Texas, that we only expand doctoral programs when there's a clear need for such a program, and that the institution that's proposing the program can compete nationally in that particular discipline. Other than that, we are happy to work with institutions to produce the highest quality programs possible, and I think that UT Tyler demonstrated a willingness to meet those high standards. They listened to our comments very carefully and kept coming back with consistently stronger proposals. So I commend UT Tyler and the work that you've done, and we look forward to you putting into place a very strong program that will have national visibility. Obviously, a program like this, it's not a large field, will help us in achieving one of our excellence goals in closing the gaps.
Would either of you like to make a comment? Come on up.
Please come up.
Yeah, please.
My name is Jim Tartar, and I have been privileged to serve as Dean of the College of Business and Technology for a number of years. And 4 years ago, when I came here, I was interim provost of the University of Texas at Tyler. And I agree with the commissioner that we did listen intently, and I believe that the board gave us generous information, and we have gotten better every time we've come back, and we hope that we are now on on a trajectory that will demonstrate your confidence in us. So thank you for the support we've gotten, and thank you for the resources you sent to examine the program, because I think they were top-notch, and you sent an A team and we passed, and we thank you for that.
Thank you. Members, you've heard the recommendation. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second, made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations. Our next agenda item is 4B, consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee regarding mission statements and preliminary authority requests from the following institution, all from the University of Texas system. This is part of the statutory 4-year review. Should I read all these for the record, Joe?
I don't think we need to.
Okay. Members, y'all can see those without my reading them.
It is the complete UT system.
Okay. Joe, you want to tell us more?
I think the most important point is the one that Dr. Phillips has already mentioned. This is a statutory requirement to every 4 years or more often review the mission statements and what we used to call the table of programs. Being in the table of programs constitutes preliminary authority to plan for program development. It's in effect a sign of saying, okay, you may invest significant resources in a particular field. The mission statements are broad narrative statements, whereas the tables of programs, preliminary authority, gets right down to a discipline and a level. For example, a bachelor's degree in the humanities or a PhD in the physical sciences, and sometimes down to an even narrower focus like a PhD in physics. The material before you, we are recommending approval of these narrative mission statements. In some cases, reapproval of what's already there. In some cases, they've asked for edits. None of the edits or changes constitutes a substantive change in mission for any of the institutions. The preliminary authorities, again, you can see those. I need to tell you that there are two categories of preliminary authority that we are not at the staff level prepared to recommend to you today. That does not mean that we're recommending denial, simply that we need some more time. One are the research PhD degrees, and those we just feel we must do a much more thorough analysis of need and demand before we can make a recommendation to you. Investing in a PhD program with all of the research infrastructure that supports it, and with a lot of capacity in many of these fields, both in the state and nationally, just calls for careful analysis, and we haven't been able to do that analysis. So we'll bring back to you at the July meeting our recommendations from the UT system for the PhDs, the research-oriented doctorates. Now, we have gone ahead with the professional practice doctorates like nursing practice or physical therapy. The other category that we're holding on for a while, and I expect to bring those to you, as Dr. Phillips mentioned, at the April 23 special meeting, are some bachelor's level degrees in engineering and physics at some of the smaller institutions in the state, including two in the UT system, the third one being West Texas A&M. My concern here is somewhat the same. Relatively small numbers of our students are adequately prepared in mathematics to be successful in these fields, and they usually require a substantial laboratory investment as well as an investment in specialized faculty, and we want the time to analyze these pretty carefully. We did not have the time prior to this meeting to finish that analysis, and I want to be sure that we've done it as well as we know how, and to be sure that we do it fairly for all of those similarly situated programs. So understanding, please, that this is not a negative recommendation, just a matter of staff time in these two categories, and with the rest of what you have before you, we would recommend approval.
Questions or comments? I think all of us are pretty new to this committee, and I think it's interesting to notice that these preliminary authorities are sort of parallel to the long-range planning that we see when we have facilities requests, kind of a parallel process. All right, members, you've heard the staff recommendation. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Agenda item 4C, consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendations to the committee regarding preliminary authority requests from several general academic institutions. 4C1 is a request from Stephen F. Austin University for a doctoral level program in school psychology. Joe?
And as I mentioned before, preliminary authority really means it's an okay to go ahead and make substantial investments and begin the detailed planning in a program area. While we're required to make those reviews every 4 years, there are some that come in off cycle and need to be processed. We don't want to hold people up for 4 years. So this is a case where the program in school psychology at the doctoral level question is, again, primarily one of need and demand. There's not much question about the need for the bigger question is whether or not there are enough people prepared to do the difficult work, and we believe that there is. The institution already has some faculty because of their master's level program. They're committed to hiring 3 more, and we recommend approval of this one as preliminary authority.
Great. Questions or comments? Brenda?
Under what circumstance would you not make the request to the board?
In an area where a program, well, let's take a fairly specific case without naming the institution. A recent proposal we received for a new PhD in a foreign language. We looked at the data around the country. There are a number of these programs already in existence. They're typically graduating 1 or 2 at most a year. They've obviously got capacity for 7 or 8. So there's excess capacity in the nation. It also happens to be a field in where there's a declining interest in that language as a major trade language. Excess capacity is certainly one area. The other is simply not enough students to make it a viable program. They're closely related.
I had another question. Your comment regarding, there are very few that are prepared, and so that's what we're looking at. You mentioned, especially on the last 2,
on the
engineering and the physics one, and then you repeated what you said again. I guess it goes, my concern is, it seems like it would be the onus of that institution to make sure they put in the proper tutoring session, whatever, to make the student successful, because if we go just by we don't have enough prepared, so let's not recruit them or develop programs in that, we wouldn't have a STEM initiative. And so I feel like what you're saying is contradictory to what we're trying to do with getting more underrepresented groups into the STEM areas, and that's a big concern. I guess the look should be at, okay, yes, look at the needs, etc., but then make sure that as they pursue these programs and have these programs, that they integrate the support system to help the students be successful until we get our college readiness standards in place, until we have the pipeline, all students are going through the 4x4, etc., or else.
You've actually made my point much more effectively than I did. Thank you. I agree that.
Even I said opposite things.
I don't think so. What we don't want to do is to invest in starting up a program that wouldn't have enough students without having put in place the necessary other procedures to make sure we've got the students. Let me take an extreme example, if I may. I'm speaking to an engineer. Chemical engineering usually requires a very big investment in laboratories. We've got some of the best chemical engineering programs in the world in the state of Texas. But to add another one at a relatively small institution without prospects of having a substantial flow of students through those laboratories would be very expensive to the state. It would be more cost-effective for us to try to build ways to feed those students, if it's a small number, into one of the existing programs if we have the capacity.
So your point was not necessarily, your point is just students, period.
Students that could become chemical engineers in this case. So
Okay.
what I'm saying is if...
I heard unprepared students, and that's just real concerning because...
What I think you said was few students prepared enough in math to enter the program.
That's
Is that what got
typically...
you? Yeah.
That's typically been the barrier to getting enough students into engineering. Now, I wish I could say...
I think it's our job to knock those barriers down.
Agreed.
But instead of waiting for the college readiness and the 4x4 programs in the pipeline to take effect, we got to do it at the university level. Not just say, well, we don't have enough, so let's not build these programs.
But if we're going to launch the program, we need to be sure we've done our work at the college level as well.
Let me ask it this way. What if the proposal included a private donor finance plan to do intensive work in math in the local school?
Any number of things might solve this problem, but we haven't analyzed it. It's simply a big enough risk that I didn't want in the roughly 10 days we had between receiving the proposal and putting this on the agenda to give you a half-baked recommendation.
Okay.
And I think we were actually very concerned about exactly the same issue.
Yes, I know you both are, even though you don't seem to understand each other.
I just don't want the barrier to be, well, we don't have enough prepared kids. Well,
I don't think that's what he meant. But okay, that's what he said. I mean, that doesn't preclude getting them prepared, right?
It does not preclude getting them
or
prepared.
getting the program launched and then putting the support system
And it does not,
Yes.
we've got one representative, or did have, I see he's gone, of one of those programs, was here a few minutes ago. And he's going to send me some more material. That's a part of this analysis that I want to be able to take advantage of before I give you a recommendation.
Just to note, not related to UTPB, but one thing that's happened with the committee meetings being earlier is getting everyone on the right cycle, including the institutions, in terms of when the proposals come in.
Yes.
And so this one was received a very short time before, and so as I understood it, and really as much as I do about it now, is that there was an issue of really needing to make sure that the right information was in place beforehand.
And so it's really the question, how do you plan to get enough prepared math students here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
And not build it because we don't have enough.
No, but that's why I say these are not negative recommendations at this point. It's simply a question that we think has to be carefully addressed.
Good. Members may not be aware that we changed the schedule of receiving information from universities so that we would have the information enough before our meetings to really look at it. Remember, we wanted that, and so we're just still in that lag there, I think.
Yeah, that's correct, and it's been not too long ago that meetings such as this were held. In some cases, the day before the board meeting, or sometimes 2 weeks before the board meeting, and now it's much sooner. And while the institutions haven't quite caught on to the change in cycle, and at the same time, you've got a shift going on where people have put in their proposals in the regular schedule, and staff's working on essentially first come, first served basis, and then the new ones come in. But we should be past that, I hope, by this summer.
Yeah, good. Okay. This vote is on the Stephen F. Austin University doctoral level program. lest you forget what you're voting on.
We did. Sorry.
Okay, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 4C2 is a request from Texas A&M International University seeking bachelor's level authority for a program in communications disorders. Joe?
And this is one of those dollar threshold questions.
Sounds like I need to go through this one.
This bachelor's degree is would be labeled a bachelor's in communications. It's really closely connected to speech pathology, but speech pathology is a graduate level program. So these would be assistants to, and the folks down at Laredo think they have a significant need, especially in the public schools, for these folks. And it seems to fit well within their mission and serving their region. We'd recommend approval.
Move to approve?
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Item 4C3 is from the University of Houston, seeking a program in American Sign Language at the bachelor's level. Joe?
And this is another one, fairly specialized, cost threshold. Be the only one in the state that would prepare people at the bachelor's level to be sign language interpreters. That's a kind of a significant social need that we would recommend approval.
Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 4D is a summary of compliance notification resulting from institutional effectiveness evaluations of associate degree granting institutions. Joe, are you going to give us a summary of this?
Well, I can. Dr. Couch and Dr. Bunga are here.
Oh, okay.
They do these things routinely. These are appear on your agenda every quarter. I think probably the only thing I need to tell you about these is that it is routine, that under the new Perkins 4 we have some authority to do things in maybe a little less routine way. We may try to make them a bit more effective to the institutions as we go forward. But right now, these institutions have done what they're supposed to, and they're in compliance.
Okay.
How do you report on non-compliance?
We send them
to the board. How is that reported? To us, or is that reported to?
Interestingly enough, I don't know that I've ever seen one that's of non-compliance, so I'm not sure I can answer that.
That's a good answer. Okay.
Now, we have had some areas on individual programs where they're not getting enough graduates out of the field or whatever, in which case they're required to come back with their plan to us about how they would correct the problem.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Agenda item 5 is a discussion of the programmatic aspects of funding items on the Agency Operations Committee agenda. This is not an action item for our committee. There are 3 topics. Item A is a request for proposals for the Texas Fund for Geography Education Program Awards for the 2008-2009 program year. Item B relates to request for applications regarding the allocation of the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act, colleges and consortia for basic grant, tech prep, and state leadership activities for program year 2008-2009. And item C concerns tech prep funding formula for the program year 2008-2009. Joe, will you take us through these?
Sure. The Agency Operations Committee has the sort of the final sign-off on any of these programs that distribute funds to the institutions or put money out in any sort of a contractual manner. But they've asked that you review those things where there's a program element to it. And so I guess this is an advisory in that sense, and then allow you to speak with your colleagues on the Agency Operations Committee if you have concerns. The first one is the Geography Fund. This is an endowment developed in conjunction with the National Geographic Society. It's $1 million endowment, so it only generates somewhere around $40,000 to $50,000 a year, and it's for grants to support geography education in K-12. We go through an RFP process, a request for proposal process, and this is simply to authorize us to do that again, and then to make those awards out of the earnings from the fund. The second one on the Carl Perkins, it's similar in that these are routine proposal processes. They do fall in 3 separate areas. The basic grants, they still have to put in a proposal for how they would spend the money, although the allocation is by formula. Similarly, the tech prep, when you heard Bill Dixon describe that formula, again, they must put in a proposal. The proposal must be an acceptable plan for expending those funds. It has to be in compliance with the federal guidelines. The state leadership is essentially a set-aside for special projects. Those are done on a competitive request for proposals from the community colleges. So we fund those proposals based on trying to do some things statewide to lead the improvement of programs. Unfortunately, Dr. Hessler, who handles all of these things, is on a Perkins site visit today.
Any discussion? You don't need to take any action on that. Right. Okay.
No action required.
Agenda item 6 is comprised of updates on 6 different projects and activities of the staff. Finally, we get to see our great staff. We've had to skip this too many times.
Okay. The first one, we've asked Dr. Zuniga to give us a report on the course redesign. This is a bit of a preliminary report in that these are on courses that were taught this past fall, and we're still working our way through that. In fact, I read Dr. Zuniga's report last night, and so I'm intrigued by some of the things I see.
Okay. Yeah, I apologize right away because my voice is gone. I don't know where it went, but it left me.
You're in good company. I think a lot of voices are leaving us.
Okay, well, mine left. You've had a better reason than I have. Yes, this is a preliminary, and as Dr. Stafford was just saying, you have a handout there, a 3-page handout. This is a preliminary evaluation of the Phase 1 and Phase 2 course redesign projects. And as you know, these projects were funded to enable institutions to redesign a course that was being taught in the traditional face-to-face manner, and in some way add technology and new pedagogy to improve that course and make it a much more high-quality course. There were 8 course redesign projects funded in Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the program, and they represented 5 different courses: U.S. History, Calculus, College Algebra, Spanish, and English Composition. 13 different institutions were involved in the redesign and the testing. So one institution would take the lead in the redesign. They recruited other institutions to offer those courses and to test them, pilot test them. 2 of the institutions did 2 different redesigns of the same course. So we ended up with 16 actual redesigned courses of those 5. Most of them, about 69% of them, were taking a traditional face-to-face course and making it what we call a replacement course. And by that we mean that they took a course that had lecture, say maybe 3 lecture classes a week, and they replaced one of those lecture classes with some other activity that was predominantly technologically based and use other pedagogy other than lecture. So an example of that would be at UT El Paso in their English composition. They took one of those sections and had a writing workshop that used computer-based labs for the students to do group work and discussions and other kinds of writing activities. And they applied that to the assignments for the English composition course. So that would be a typical example of the kind of course redesign that we're looking at. There were 1,233 students that were involved in taking a redesigned course in fall of 2007. All of the sites that were redesigning courses did test in 2007, fall 2007, and many of them are repiloting again this spring. So we're just in the early phases of collecting data on this. And so, probably not surprisingly, simply redesigning a course did not lead to higher persistence rates. About half of them did have higher persistence rates, and the other half had lower persistence rates in the redesigned course than in the traditional course, for whatever reason. And we need to look into that more. And some of them, it was that the pilot they had very small numbers. And at one institution, in fact, everybody dropped for some reason. So we don't know why that happened, but they plan to repilot, test it in the spring. In terms of, we looked at grades, and in terms of 8 courses, there was a significant difference between the student grades in the redesigned and the traditional. Unfortunately, in 4 of those, the grades were lower in the redesigned course than in the traditional. Again, that has something to do, I think, with inputs as well. We looked at the students going into courses, into the redesigned versus the traditional. In many of the cases, the students didn't have a choice as to whether they took the redesigned or the traditional, because they didn't have enough room in the traditional course, even if it was running simultaneously. They put students into the redesigned course, and it was new to them. They were uncomfortable with it. And in one institution told us that they had offered students an incomplete for that course because they didn't know what they were getting into when they got into it. So it's not unusual to see no significant difference in grades. Also, just because it's a very small change in what you're doing. And grades may not pick up the full flavor of the change in the redesign. The last factor we've looked at so far is cost savings. You might be aware that in the Phase 3 grants, we've contracted with the National Center for Academic Transformations to work with the Phase 3 projects. And one of the things that they look at is cost savings. So 9 of the programs so far have given us data on their activity-based costing, which is the amount of money that it takes to run the traditional or the redesigned course. And again, there's a lot of variation. The redesigned courses cost anywhere from $5,700 to $24,000. And we looked at it by student enrolled, because presumably if you enroll enough students in the redesigned course, you could bring the cost down. But some of those were very small enrollments, so only, again, about half of them showed a significant cost savings per student in the redesigned course. We also looked at it by successful completion, and it was pretty much the same story. We're getting inconclusive evidence of cost savings in that area at this point. We will be continuing to study these to see how well they're doing and what lessons that we can learn from them. We have already started with the Phase 3 programs conducting site evaluations with a standard rubric to make sure that we're getting consistent data from them. And we will continue to look at the Phase 1 and Phase 2 projects as well.
If I might make a couple of comments, and as I say, Robin and I have not had a chance to dialogue on this yet, but redesign or design by itself we've never expected to be a solution. There is such a thing as a good design and a bad design, or a design that still needs to be improved. And in fact, in most design processes, you design a prototype and you test it, and then you go back and design it again, and you do that for a few iterations until you get a design that really works well. So this is an important part of that feedback process of redesigning, thought of as a process. The other piece of that, and I say this having talked to one particular program, I also know that there is still an issue of the good teacher. You had a fair amount of conversation about that this morning. And a design doesn't work if it's not a good teacher, and for that matter, a good fit between teacher and design. And so these are some examples of things that I think just show that this is going to be a high-value process, but not a quick-fix process.
Yeah, there's lots of reasons why things might not be working right now, and implementation is definitely one of them. We can see in the data that we've gotten back so far is that not all of the faculty have embraced the redesign to the same degree, and that can make implementation of the redesign not as successful at some of the sites than at others.
One of the projects in this I would call particularly to your attention is the University of North Texas U.S. History, and look specifically at where it was taught at the University of North Texas, because this is really probably the third iteration for that course at UNT. And you'll see some pretty dramatic improvements and cost savings in that one.
Yes.
Contrast that to the college algebra, or the calculus one at the top of the page, which was a first time through on something that was put together pretty fast from materials that were in the public domain. And you see there a fair number of problems. So,
Joe, in developing these new courses, in every case, did the developers of new courses follow the standards and the guidelines of the National Center? Because, of course, they have a repository of information about how not to do this, how to proceed with course redesign, and I know that oftentimes university faculty don't like to pay attention to anybody but themselves. So,
well, it's a good point. No, to the extent that they chose to go out on the web and or otherwise get the NCAT material, they may have, but we didn't get NCAT under contract until these programs were well into the actual delivery.
What did NCAT say? I mean, they've been working with us nationally. They're the ones who've really pushed the concept of course redesign. When they, in terms of their involvement, I saw you nodding their head that these projects didn't follow their guidelines.
No, they didn't, because they weren't. This was before NCAT came into it, so they are not even a part of these particular projects. They were involved in Phase 3, but not in Phase 1 and Phase 2. So they haven't had any experience with this particular group of projects.
Have they since been made aware of the existence of NCAT?
Oh, have they? They know about NCAT, yes. Whether they do it or not, we have no control.
Why do we not require, if these guidelines have been proven, and there's lots of evidence elsewhere, why are we not requiring that these projects follow the guidelines?
The way the statute was written, we had about 3 months to put these together, and it took us well past that to get NCAT into the process. So we rushed ahead with the best talent we could find to move as quickly as possible and meet that, to get some things rolling.
Are we requiring that they use the guidelines now?
Yes, absolutely. On all the subsequent phases, once we got not only are we requiring the guidelines, they must participate. Most of them are participating with NCAT.
Robin, when you looked at the evaluations, did you see a difference between those who were closest to following guidelines, I guess by chance, and those who weren't? I mean, were the ones that were closest succeeding? I think we've got to be careful that this is something that's been seen as very successful elsewhere, but I've also seen projects that had an early life of success and then seemed to wither. And so, I agree with what Joe said about the iterations and getting better, but I think we have to make sure that we're very clear in our own assessments as to whether it's working here or not.
We haven't gotten that much data yet. That's where we're going with the Phase 3 projects at the moment. We're conducting site visits, and those site visits are, as I said, we developed a rubric to see how they're following those guidelines. So then we'll be able to judge how they're doing in relation to those guidelines and the things that we hope them to accomplish. But those are just beginning.
Lynn? Is what initially is driving this House Bill 1 and a requirement, and is what drove that hopefully better methods of reaching students more efficiently, more effectively, more creatively, more in tune to how they learn? Are we going about this the right way?
Well, let me respond to that question, Lori. This was a result of some work and some research we had done internally about the effectiveness of or the obstacles that entry-level college courses were to ultimate student success. And we had become aware that this National Center for Academic Transformation had been working for some years in this area of course redesign, based on the hypothesis that you can redesign courses in a way that combine traditional face-to-face instruction with computer-based instruction in a way that yields better learning outcomes and also yields a higher level of cost efficiency. We were also particularly attracted to this because we know that we are now into the first generation of learners who've done an awful lot of learning on computers. And so it seemed like a good experiment to try. So House Bill 1 was to some extent based on these comments that we'd been making to members of the legislature about this work that was going on in other parts of the country. And we were expected to launch a similar project here in Texas. But I hope that we do pay careful attention to the lessons learned from NCAT, because the whole advantage of working with them is precisely because they've got a whole compendium of lessons learned from the mistakes and the successes from institutions that have been working on this issue for some time. So I'm a little bit, even if institutions had, if we hadn't formally made the contact with NCAT, that they hadn't on their own kind of done a survey of the literature and taken a look at their website and figured out, well, we don't want to do it this way or that way because it hasn't been successful anywhere in the country.
There is a great deal of public literature, and there's also a lot of evidence that to support just what Raymond was saying, that these courses were found to be both more cost-effective and with greater learning outcomes. And so it's a little disappointing at this stage we haven't seen the same thing, but it was not without a lot of research evidence. Unlike some innovations, there was evidence in multiple states that this had worked.
And other things hadn't worked. Yeah.
I could see where if it was a course that was completely online as opposed to the ones that you described that maybe met 3 times a week and one of the times was online and 2 was face-to-face, I could see where the online might be more cost-effective, but I can't see where theirs would be more cost-effective. They still have the classroom space. They still have the professor who's being paid. They're not going to...
That's true, but they might be able to enroll more students, or they might be, even better, be able to retain more students. And then it would be a cost savings to both the institution and the students, and that would be the goal.
There's a lot more to it than the description would suggest, because there's a variation between, I mean, every course redesign isn't the same.
Right.
And some take much more advantage of non-lecture opportunities than others. So there is a lot of variation, at least from what I've seen.
Yeah. One of the reasons I raised a question about whether the institutions in Texas were taking a look at those NCAT guidelines goes back to a comment that Joe made. One of the first guidelines of NCAT is you've got to have a good fit between the faculty member and the design of the course. But if you've got a faculty member who's virtually computer illiterate, that's not the right person to teach that course.
Well, it's also true that they believe in anecdotally a good friend of mine who is very computer literate, in fact was president of the Management Information Society nationally, was very against distance learning. But he was forced to do it. But after 4 years, he liked it very much and won a teaching award from it. But he said the first couple of years he was awful. And so it's not just the technology literacy, although that's a part of it. It's the whole scope of do you believe in
concept.
And what you're doing. One thing occurs to me that may be a factor is I heard secondhand that Carol Twigg, who's really the head of that effort, had mentioned in another place that she was a little concerned that Texas was doing it, the scale Texas was doing it, because apparently it's been much more of a cottage process in the past in terms of building it up, and so this was a much more ambitious effort than anyone else has undertaken. which may account for part of the difference.
By far, it is the most ambitious, but we have 120,000 or so, well, closer to 180,000 new students every year entering and taking these courses. So we can't afford to do it as a cottage industry. We really have to take it in a much larger scale, and we will have to learn a few of these lessons as we go along.
That's what I was suggesting, is because of the magnitude. It may be different than what they've supported, but I just do think, I know Robin was actually brought in because of her expertise in program evaluations. She's sort of looking over all of our projects, and the reality is we need to make sure that we just don't believe something is good and effective, but we have to really prove it, and that's why her main role here.
As you said, I mean, one of the reasons we do program evaluation, if we could trust that everybody was going to take the guidelines and use them and just go with it, then we wouldn't need program evaluation. But I'm sure all of them are aware of it.
Hope that doesn't mean you actively discourage them from using the guidelines, right?
Right. You can lead a horse to water, but...
What strikes me is the generation that's creating this course redesign for the generation of students that are much more computer literate and have grown up with that are two different generations. So I wonder if that's part of the problem.
Some of that, well, I think some of that's changing. Younger faculty certainly are very astute with the technology, but I think it...
But they didn't learn that way. They didn't go to school that way, ever.
But I think that what David says needs to be taken to heart, too, that it's not just about the technology. Somebody can be very attuned to using technology, very good with it, but they may be very uncomfortable with it in a teaching and learning environment, or it's the pedagogy, because we're not talking just about adding technology. We're talking about using the technology to foster different kinds of pedagogy. And we did get some comments back from faculty that they weren't sure that this was the right way to teach. Well, until they come along on that and decide that, yes, not just standing there telling the students what to do is going to work better.
Well, probably the truth is probably that the students could instruct the faculty on how to use computer-based instruction.
That's my point.
Because they're more adept at it. I don't know how many of you had a chance to see that little video clip that I sent all of you, that what some incredible percentage of 4-year-olds and pulled information off the internet. So I'm sure that, well, if you look at Facebook and YouTube and all those extraordinary applications of, because that is essentially computer-based information, computer-based learning, all that stuff was not developed by old guys. It was all developed by kids.
That's my point.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought up that example, because computer literacy doesn't mean the same thing it did.
No.
Even 6 or 7 years ago.
It means us.
How do you use? Yeah, I mean, because all these kids know how to use computers, but they also use their instant messenger. They use their iPods. They download various lectures. They use Facebook. I mean. And that's something that you guys may have a better concept of than I do, but it's used really as a gathering point for various things, and I don't think we fully understand how that can be used. I noticed one of the political campaigns was talking about how they used Facebook to really to build their community base. I've seen it at schools where students use it as a way to gather students at various locations, and so there are things like that we don't know that probably go beyond this even. So it's about learning and how to get them to learn whatever the medium is.
I know the military is doing a lot of experimentation. Of course, this is technical skills with gaming technologies.
Yeah. Well, I think we should encourage the campuses to involve students and as team members for those faculty that are working on course redesign. I think students should participate.
Bring up the institute again. I think it might, in some projects, be good to engage a few students as sort of junior fellows in some of these projects, because they come at things from a different angle.
If the guideline says that works, otherwise forget it.
That's not an end case, as far as I know. I've never seen that one, so that might be a new one for them to think about.
And if you can improve upon NCATE, I mean, they're not. Yeah. I mean, we shouldn't necessarily be satisfied.
I think there's another lesson, though, that we might have to learn here, and that is that if we're lucky enough to have to be percolating along in a session and see that some money is going to be given to us to do such a wonderful thing, we need to make sure that we get those dates right so we have enough time to implement the project. And because we had to jump into this so quickly, we didn't have time to, for example, take the faculty who might be involved and familiarize them with the concepts. And it just, we were kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say doomed before we started, but it wasn't the best way to start.
Well, I don't think it's a terrible start, and we have phase 3. I think it's just beginning now that we're looking at, and I think that's going to be a very different picture. So
I hope so.
To make two other observations on this. We've talked a lot about technology, but redesign is a design to get the students more engaged and to use whatever is the most appropriate mechanism. Sometimes that's a matter of using the students themselves as peer teachers rather than anything to do with technology. That's, in this history course, one of the most exciting pieces of this is the way they have students relive a point in history and, for example, be a mock Texas legislature in a historical context. There's not much technology involved in that, but as a learning experience, it's very powerful. The other observation I would like to make is we're looking here at some very small numbers.
yes, we are.
And look particularly at the Dallas Community College District LaCroix Center's experiments. You're comparing success rates in classes of 20,
Right.
22, 23. One or two students can make a big difference in that, and that may not be all that significant, especially in an early stage of development. So,
That made my point. We may say very different things as they start to scale up to larger numbers, because if you see the traditional courses in many respects are much, much larger than these pilot courses.
That's part of the idea, I think, isn't it?
Well, yeah, because we're piloting right now to see how well it works. So at your numbers, tyranny of small numbers, like as Joe said, one or two people can shift things very quickly.
but know that Robin is digging in. We're going to take everything that she can find and everything everyone else can find very seriously as we move forward and continue this process of design. And we do have NCAT now deeply engaged in subsequent designs.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
Joe, you're going to update us on item 6B, the Applied Baccalaureate Task Force.
I am. Vanessa Davis is the person who's been staffing this, and she was invited to do a major presentation in Atlanta today, so I'm filling in a bit. The Applied Baccalaureate degrees in this state have traditionally been the Bachelor of Applied Arts and Sciences, the BAAS. More recently, we've added the Bachelor of Applied Technology, the BAT. This task force was pulled together to help us review what we're doing and give us some advice on how to go forward. Interestingly enough, they've had to spend a fair amount of time just trying to define what is an applied baccalaureate degree, and then out of that comes a recommendation that we should move towards changing the labels on them. The BAAS is widely used in Texas, but not widely used in the United States. The BAT is used a bit in Canada, but not used very much in the United States. The one that is used most often is the BAS, the Bachelor of Applied Sciences, which corresponds to the Associate of Applied Sciences at the 2-year level. And since it's the Associate of Applied Sciences that is the normal feed into these applied baccalaureates, they're recommending that change and then recommending a definition that ties it back to this AAS.
So the AAS, so that's the 2-year community college, 2-year, yeah, and then the 4-year equivalent is a bachelor's degree, but it's called the Bachelor's of Applied Science.
In most of the country.
Okay. Trying to follow this.
It's called the Bachelor of Applied Science. In most of the country here, it's called the Bachelor of Arts in Applied Sciences, or I'm sorry, the Bachelor of Applied Arts and Sciences,
Okay.
Or the Bachelor of Applied Technology. The task force has also spent a fair amount of time working with the Workforce Commission folks, looking at workforce needs, and they're not complete on that work, but they will have recommendations for us on unmet needs that they think an applied baccalaureate degree might help address. The task force goal is to complete their work at the end of this semester and to give you recommendations in the summer. A couple of things that they're looking at yet are how to use distance education to address this need. Most of the folks who get the AAS degree are then employed, and they find themselves moving up into a supervisory role, and that's when they realize that they really want a bachelor's degree. And so distance education for a mature, full-time employed student has a fair amount of appeal.
Joe, what's the name of the, it's called reverse
transfer?
Reverse transfer. Would this be something that they could look into as well, or is that in the same? It was brought to my attention that it would be really advantageous for persistence rates if a student went to any community college for a year or 6 months a year, whatever, got community college credits, and then they transfer. If at the point they reach the 60 hours, that they could then get that reverse, that they could then get the associate's degree automatically. So if your child, all of a sudden gets a 2-year degree, they're like, oh, okay, that's one step. So the next step is now I get my bachelor's. I'd be interested to see if there's any problem with that as far as funding, as far as four-year universities being able to count their students so it wouldn't be double dipping, that sort of thing.
I don't think there is any problem. It's become a pretty widespread practice.
Sure would be an incentive for all kids if we defaulted that.
It's not a part of this particular task force,
Okay.
but I think it's
All right, it just reminded me.
become a fairly common thing now, although not universal. It is something that was discussed at some length at the recent Transfer Summit, and I think we'll see some of that in the Transfer Summit report. The one other issue I just might mention to you, well, two issues. One, there are some accreditation questions since the faculty requirements for the AAS degree are not as demanding as they are for a baccalaureate degree, and so we anticipate that we're going to have to address this with the Southern Association at some point as a part of the report. And then the remaining thing that there's obviously a fair number of additional community colleges that would like to offer the baccalaureate degree. At this point, by law, only 3 are allowed to. Those are issues that this task force will be addressing later this spring.
Any other comments? Item 6C is the timeline for college readiness standards implementation. Evie? Welcome back.
Hasn't been long, has it?
No, it hasn't been long.
Just long enough for me to prepare. No. We do have a timeline. We are working on a timeline on implementation of the college readiness standards. And, in fact, we've done quite a bit of work on it, and I'm ashamed to admit we realize that we've been doing this by ourselves when we really need a lot of input and a lot of collaboration with TEA, with our P16 special advisors. So we have set up several meetings. The first one's going to be taking place on March 13th with TEA, so we can go over what we would like to do, what they would like to do, and make certain that we are working both together on some projects and that we have separate projects that are mutually supportive of one another. We're hoping to have a meeting on April 7th of the P16 special advisors from all over the state. They were very helpful to us during the public comment period, and we want to make certain that we keep them engaged throughout the process. We're also meeting...
Does everybody know what Evie's talking about when she says the P16 special advisors?
Is that the representation from each of the P16s?
Each of the, I'm sorry, many times people don't know what I'm talking about. I should have gone into more detail.
No. I just wanted to make sure that Brenda...
Every single institution in the state was offered the opportunity to have a P16 special advisor who reported to either the provost or the vice president on academic affairs. And this is the first time we've really made, as a staff of the board, a real concerted effort to meet with the people who could interact with all the faculty, because we felt that in order for the college readiness standards to really be successful, we had to make certain all of the institutions were fully engaged in all the academic areas. I think it's working pretty well, although just as you can guess, we've all become very friendly with Robin, who's going to be doing an evaluation of how well this is working. And they are really our main conduit of how we are planning on to infiltrating the disciplines at the institutions of higher ed. We have to work with TEA if we're going to be successful in terms of getting those college readiness standards into the school districts, and more important, or as important, is making certain that the colleges of education and the teacher, both in-service and pre-service organizations, are fully aware of them and are working with us on implementation. We're meeting with some of the regional service center people in the last week of March, and we are also going to be starting regional meetings that will involve Dave Conley going around to all of our, I shouldn't say all of our regions, going around to selected regions to make certain that everyone understands the implications. I am hopeful that when you meet in April, we will be able to turn out a timeline that goes through 2013 that indicates what we would like to be doing and who we're going to be working with to make certain we're successful.
Okay, thanks. Sorry to interrupt you. Are you done?
Real quickly, if there's an opportunity to work with TASB as well, because that's the concern that I'm hearing is from school board members who don't feel like they've been engaged enough in the process, and that could be that TEA is really speaking specifically to superintendents and staff and curriculum people, but the policymakers need to be comfortable with it as well.
Well, in fact, just this week, even before you recommended that we go talk to TASA and TASB, we were already talking to Johnny Veselka from there to make certain, and Jim Crow, who's from there, from there, to make certain that we did have a meeting and did work together on this.
Thank you.
And also, as a by the way, Raymond is doing several presentations at their June conference.
Oh, good. Their summer conference.
So we are trying to get the word out as much as we can.
Don't forget about the P16 councils.
Yeah.
And we are trying to put together a standard presentation that would be available to all of the regional councils and then could tumble down to the school districts and to the institutions.
Thank you.
Thank you. That would be very helpful.
Okay. Joe will tell us about item 6D, the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee.
And this is another staff member who's traveling today, meeting with the chief academic officers of the state. Catherine Parsoneau has headed the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee. This is a 23-person committee, really advisory to the staff and to you on undergraduate education. But these advisory committees really work both ways. They also end up advising each other a whole lot, and it's one of our more powerful ways of leading change at the institutions. This committee has really just gotten underway this fall. Dr. Judith Bean, the Associate VP for Undergraduate Studies at TWU, and Dr. Thomas Bynum, the President at Coastal Bend College, are the co-chairs of this committee. They are developing their work plan and very much looking at those set of issues that they think they can make a difference in the success part of our goals. I'm really not prepared to give you a whole lot more detail on that. I'd have to have Catherine here.
Okay. That's good. Any questions?
James Goldman is here to do the next one. So
okay.
James, come on up.
James, item 6E, Graduate Education Advisory Committee.
This is a committee that's been in place a little longer than the Undergraduate Education Committee, and making more progress, and James can give us a quick report on that.
Hello. The last meeting of the Graduate Education Advisory Committee was on February 13th, and they've continued work on some ongoing projects. One of them is the diversity report. The Committee of the Whole considered the diversity report, and they worked on a process to see it through to publication. The chairs were empowered to oversee the final stages of the report, which will include a professional editing job and a public comment period. After the public comment period, the chairs will work with that editor to make any final changes that might be necessary based on the public comments, and then they'll bring it back to the full committee for final consideration before publication.
That's great.
They've also worked on their strategic goal process. They've got 6 strategic goals related to doctoral education. They're now at the stage of refining those goals down to the point where there are specific indicators, performance indicators for each goal. That's going to be ongoing. We hope to have that work completed by the summer. A third area that they've been working is in our preliminary authority approval process. They're examining that process, and they're both discussing and gathering information from us staff so that they can issue us some recommendations about ways to streamline that proposal process.
Oh, good. Great. That'd be nice. Just been talking about that. Great. Anything else?
The final item I wanted to mention was the 18 characteristics of doctoral programs. The committee has already worked up the list of the 18 characteristics that they feel characterize a high-quality doctoral program. They're now working with us staff to get the data for those 18 characteristics on the web and filled out, the data filled out for each doctoral program in the state. So that's going to be a process that will probably take most of this year. They're working with us to talk about ways of, what are going to be the deadlines for each item, how should it appear, should it appear on institutional websites or the CB website or both, questions like that. We hope to have that online by fall '09, meaning that it will be available, the fields will be filled in, and students and parents and other institutions can look at the information.
Some of the smaller institutions expect to have that done fall '08, but not everybody.
Well, this may have happened before I came on this committee, but are we going to have a chance to look at those, or have we already looked at them?
Actually, I think I gave them to you at the last time, but we were in such a rush to get out of the building.
Oh, yeah.
We didn't
18
spend time on
characteristics, that sounded new to me, but anyway, maybe we could get an email.
Sure.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And our last item is an update of other staff activities. Joe?
I don't think there's anything more I need to tell you except that the Chapter 7, Chapter 12 rewrite is close. We hope it's easier to read, that we will have sufficient detail in it to allow those accrediting agencies that want to work with us to know how to proceed. And I say close, but David Gardner and Bill Franz and I have got to have at least one meeting this week on that before we can move ahead with it. But it'll be complex enough that I'm sure you'll get some phone calls and some questions.
But it's still on target to be recommended in April?
Yes.
Great, that's great.
Posting Monday.
That's right, you said, yeah, that's right. Okay, great.
Posting Monday, so we can go look at the post.
I think we can send it to you before we post it.
That would be nice.
It's not, we didn't want to send it to you and then send it to you again 4 or 5 more times.
Okay. Anything else, Joe?
That's it.
You might want to point out, Joe, I mean, it is a radical change, and so...
We're not doing it side by side, in other words.
Well, one of the difficulties is that they're combining Chapter 7 and 12, and so there's such a radical change that part of what we're talking about is the information we have adequate for people to really understand the differences and to get at that. So I just alert you that one heads up is where we've had 2 chapters, that we will now have 1 chapter, and there will be some combination, including...
For example, standards appeared in 3 different places in the 2 chapters. They'll appear in 1 place this time.
Good.
That makes it hard for us to figure out how to do a side-by-side, so we hope we found a better way to explain it to you, but that's part of what we still have to meet about.
You can run it by this English teacher if you dare.
Okay.
This concludes the business of our committee. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Brenda and I say yes.
Get home safely.
Thank you.
Yeah.